Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And we are meeting once again with the last lecture of the series, that is lecture 32 of Modern Novel, Novel 2. This lecture is not only last in the series, but the last lecture of the revision series as well. So please pull up your socks and keep your all concentration on the talk, because we are going to sum up everything possible in today's talk to make you all ready for your examination. Well, today's talk will precisely cover a comparison between James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, a very important comparison because these are the two writers of 20th century who are famous for their 20th century writings as well as for their use of writing technique, stream of consciousness. And moreover, we will have a comprehensive talk on the Lord of the Flies as well. So this makes the synopsis for today's talk. We'll be starting with the comparison between James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, the writers of Stream of Consciousness. Well, we know that Virginia Woolf is famous for her adaptation of the interior monologue. She adopts the interior monologue and tries to put her into her own way where she can, without involving any outer voice, can voice her inner thoughts. And in order to do so, her plot is reduced to the minimum so she can really concentrate on this very aspect of her writing. And that is how you have seen this in To the Lighthouse, that how limited is the plot, and it's if you conclude the whole thing, it's only one day that she describes in total length. Now, and there are simultaneous time and chronological time. You see that when she wants to cover up 20 years, how soon she can cover them up, and when she wants to explore even 9 days or 2 days of a lifetime, she tries to open each minute detail of every character's perspective and then spends her techniques over there. Her writings are omniscient and in third-person narration most of the time. However, the moment she gets into stream of consciousness, it's take a direct interaction between thoughts and the reader. And you will also observe the shift of the point of view, that she presents a quick shift. At times readers are left nowhere to find out whether it's Virginia Woolf speaking, it's the character speaking, or it's something else. So it really takes time, and at times it takes turns. You need to read the thing again and again to find out the exact situation. However, once you find it out, things get crystal clear and you are really able to understand how the character is feeling at that time. That in other situation it is not very much possible, because what gets to you is a second person point of view or a third person point of view. This first person point of view really gets to you, and that only happens in stream of consciousness. And then the poetical language with poetical devices. Virginia has this quality of using descriptive language, and for that description she uses poetical language and poetical devices, which again gives strengthen her writing style and beautifies and glorifies the canvas that she uses for her narratives. Well, if we come to James Joyce, things are not so very different. However, yes, there are differences. James Joyce is again a famous writer for stream of consciousness. He again uses the simultaneous time frames in chronologically and as well as the other way around. However, you will find that he uses no punctuation whatsoever. You will find some punctuations, very, though not too much of them, but some punctuations in Virginia Woolf writing. Her sentences are long, length, elaborated sentences. At times a whole paragraph goes into one sentence and you don't know where to stop. And same thing happens with James Joyce. No punctuation whatsoever, because when you are flowing into the memories, when you are flowing in with the time, you don't know where to stop and how to stop and what kind of pause is possible. His narratives are known as narrative realism, and he involves mythic method as well. As I gave you reference of James Joyce writing, the one text that we read in our course, and you saw how he brings in methodological references to beautify his writings. So this is one major difference in Virginia Woolf's writing and James Joyce's writing, that James uses mythical methods. However, Virginia tries to involve in poetical language and poetical devices. James uses narrative realism, and Virginia brings in the idealism and romanticism of life to show the real picture and how it should be and how it should like. So moving on with it, now regarding stream of consciousness, what are the differences in their point of views in James Joyce and Virginia Woolf? Well, how do they understand and how do they make their reader understand stream of consciousness is that a narrative device to depict the multitudinal thoughts and feelings which pass through the mind. That's how the stream of consciousness as a writing technique described by not only both of these writers but almost all the writers who followed that at different points in during the century. Now, what is the different use of stream of consciousness in James Joyce and in Virginia Woolf? I hope you'll be able to see this chart on the screen, and you will see that James Joyce uses the technique as an intellectual analysis of human being supported by a searched and brave language, by the use of metaphors and new words, new vocabulary, and without the insertion of the third-person narrator. However, Virginia Woolf uses this as the third narrator, an indirect interior monologue to represent a gap between chronological and interior time. The rhetoric speech of analogy represents a lighthouse for the reader. Well, you will find James Joyce bringing in extreme objectivity of events, and the narrator is totally covered. However, in Virginia Woolf, the narrator is also present. He helps the reader to orient in the text, to introduce himself or herself in the text. Along with stream of consciousness, one more thing that is present in both of these writers' writings is the utility of epiphany, the coincidence point. Now, what is this epiphany? Epiphany, as I definitely would have mentioned when I've been discussing James Joyce and Virginia Woolf for their writings, that it's a sudden spiritual manifestation, whether in the vulgarity of speech or of gesture or in a memorable phase of the mind itself. He believed that it was for the man of letters to record these epiphanies with extreme care, seeing that they themselves are the most delicate and evanescent of moments. It's a quotation by James Joyce, Stephen Hero. Now, musicality in James Joyce and Virginia Woolf's writing. This element of rhythm is again present in the writings by both of these writers, and it can also be known as phonetic rhetoric speech. It's a phonetical speech that you would observe. In both, artists have functioned to find the associations between the events described and memories to start the reflections of themselves. Accompanying the advent of epiphany have the same function of leitmotif in music. Now, analogies and differences. Use of stream of consciousness is an analogy in both of the writings by both writers. Focus on the psychology of character, both writers do it. Use of phonetic, rhetoric, speech and symbolism is heavily observable in the writings by both of these writers. Exceed the canons of romance, build them. Well, however, there are two differences: different presentations of epiphany and then level of objectivity. Objectivity is higher in James Joyce writing, although it is also present in Woolf's writing, but the intensity is more than the intensity is comparatively more in James Joyce writing. Well, now this was all about a comparison between the two writers who wrote simultaneously in 20th century, James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. Now, going deep again into The Lord of the Flies, where some of the points were left to discuss for this talk, we discussed Lord of the Flies as allegoric political allegory by William Golding. Now, in order to completely revise this narrative, I would want you to take a regular course and revise almost all the major things present in the story, so to recall all the memories about it, or to overcome if there is any ambiguity or confusion left. In this series of revision, we have covered all the stories, all the narratives that we read so far, and we are only left with now this Lord of the Flies by William Golding that we are going to cover today. Well, Lord of the Flies by William Golding is an allegory and adventure story, castaway fiction that discusses loss of innocence elaborately. The narrative is set in early 1950s Salisbury, England, and is highly influenced by World War I. The story is told by an anonymous third-person narrator who conveys the events of the novel without commenting on the action or intruding into the story. Now, you will see this narrative as a total contrast to James Joyce and Virginia Woolf's writing, as William Golding does not comment or interpret himself as what is the character saying and why is he saying that. However, this why element is very much answered by Virginia Woolf and James Joyce in their writings. So, it's a total contrast that is simultaneously produced in 20th century by William Golding. The narrator speaks in the third person, primarily focusing on Ralph's point of view, but following Jack and Simon in certain episodes. Well, the narrator is omniscient and gives us access to the character's inner thought. So, we are able to access the inner thoughts, but this access is not as direct as observed and experienced when we are reading a writing that has stream of conscious embedded as writing technique. The story is presented in structured in different themes, and it shows the aspects of society, the dark aspects, violent aspects, pessimistic element of 20th century, tragedy, unsparing, and set in a deserted tropical island. So the settings are as dark as the story's message is. Well, there are some major conflicts, some major themes that the writer wanted to present, and if we try to categorize all the themes down and make major categories of them, we are able to take three categories out. The very first one and the most important one is free from the rules. The story depicts a society that is free from the rules. There is no rule, no regulation, no law, and no order. That adult society formally imposed on children. We know that this story discusses this political allegory through characters who are children. So the society is shown of immature individuals who are not bound anymore and who are exposed to form their own rules and regulations followed by their nature and the nature. The second important category is the boys marooned on the island, their struggle with the conflicting human instincts that exist within each of them. It's quite a significant theme that William Golding discusses in a lot of the Flies, where he says that each human being behaves out of his or own instinct, and we all have this good and bad within. Now this depends on the circumstances and the environment around that supports these instincts. So whichsoever instinct is supported well gets refined and comes out and is exposed, and whichsoever is snubbed and does not get refined, it hides somewhere inside. However, it exists, and whenever it gets space, it comes outside. So this natural existence of good and bad instinct inside every human being is very well presented by William Golding in this story. And the third important theme that comes out of the reading is the instinct to work towards civilization. We all, being humans, strive for some kind of order, some kind of sophistication and civilization that can raise our status above animals, and the instinct to descend into savagery, violence, and chaos. However, at the same time, the other picture of the other side of the instinct exists, that is desire for savagery, violence, and chaos. The story has again a traditional plot that can be fairly divided into three main categories, as we have been doing that: rising action, climax, and the falling action. Well, this triangle can clearly be understood by now: rising action, climax, and falling action. So if we look at the rising action, these again can be divided into three major I would say chapters, although there are many chapters inside, but three chapters of the rising action. In the first chapter, in the first stage of the rising action, you will find that the boys assemble on the beach after that after the plane crash, and in the election for leader, since they all are now alone on this island where no human being ever stepped before, they feel a need to be led by someone, to be told what to do, because that's how they have been working so far. So in this need, they decide for election for a leader, and Ralph defeats Jack, and we get to know that Ralph never volunteered to be leader of the group. However, although Jack did, but Ralph has been selected, as William Golding supports this character right from the beginning, keeping leadership qualities. Ralph defeats Jack, who is furious when he loses, and then we find this defeat right in the beginning of the story creates an enemy, a strong enemy for Ralph, who is Jack, who is furious by nature. And if you look at both of these characters, you will find a sharp contrast right from the beginning that the writer wants to set in, a contrast between good and bad, a contrast between right and wrong, a contrast between civilization and ignorance and savagery. Anyways, as the second stage starts as the boys explore the island. Tension grows between Jack and Ralph. When they start exploring, the leader's interest is survival. However, the antagonist interest, if we take Jack as an antagonist, however, I do not agree with it completely, because in the end we find that I don't know why, but the antagonist becomes the source of children's survival. When Jack sets the whole jungle on fire, that's the moment when the rescue team or the the ship or the naval officer gets to reach there. However, if we in the beginning, if we take it as protagonist or antagonist, the tension grows between both of them, and Jack, who is more interested in hunting, in killing, in savagery, in destroying things, and Ralph is interested and believes in that most of the boys' effort should go toward building up, toward building up shelters and maintaining a signal fire, so to keep up a society, so to keep up life going on, and the hope and the struggle to survive and go back to a civilized society. So this second stage is basically setting up towards the climax, and we see tension building up quite frequently. In almost every line you will find that tension is building up. And the third and final stage of the rising action is that when rumors surface that there is some sort of beast living in the jungle on the island, to make it precise, the boys grow fearful, and the group begins to divide into two camps supporting Ralph and Jack. And when this rising action is ending and reaching its climax, we see that there is a clear-cut distinction and grouping between both of these characters, Jack and Ralph, who are now divided into two groups. And ultimately Jack forms a new tribe altogether, and fully immersing himself in the savagery of the hunt, of killing. Alright, this gives us a space to discuss climax, and climax starts here. That again has two stages. In the first stage of climax, you will see Simon encounters the Lord of the Flies in the forest, glad, and realizes that the beast is not a physical entity, but rather something that exists within each boy on the island. Well, now let me explain again what is Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies is basically the skull of that bear that was hunted by Jack's tribe, and to show his anger, or to show his savagery, or to give a sacrifice, to give a gift to the beast in the jungle, what he does and what the tribe does, they cut off the skull from the bear's body and hook it up on a spear and place it in front of the cave. They think that that is the shelter of the beast, and they think that this is a gift for the beast, and once received, the beast will not harm them. However, very soon this head covered with blood gets covered with flies, and this is the symbol that is also taken as the title of the story. Well, however, Simon here, you will find the Simon character it's very important, because most of the time you will find Simon's character being spokesman of the writer, William Golding. And Simon says and explores that the beast that they are being afraid of is not outside but within, because he finds this activity done by Jack's tribe is a open demonstration of that beast inside them. So he finally realizes that this bad is not outside but inside, and it's not inside only one or two, it's inside every one of us. However, he's never able to convey this message to his group. When in stage 2 of the climax, when Simon tries to approach the other boys and convey this message to them, they fall on him and kill him savagely. Well, you definitely have with this pack you will have the complete movie based on Lord of the Flies. However, I remember in lecture 20 when I was discussing this event, I tried to give you some clips along with discussion, and there was one clip that shows this savage act done by boys where they are celebrating their hunt and they are busy in their savage actions, and meanwhile what happens that Simon comes down from the mountain and running and excited to share this news with his group that there's no beast on the island and it's only them. However, his figure is a kind of shadow running in the dark, and he's not recognized by his fellows, and then is understood and taken as beast himself, and as a result murdered savagely. Well, and this murder, this sad incident in the story, brings the climax of the story as well. Alright, now after the climax, traditionally we understand that we step into the falling action. And falling action again has two stages. So altogether we have divided this story into 7 stages. 3 stages of rising action, 2 stages of climax, and 2 stages of falling action. Well, soon after this murder, the story starts falling down for its end, and we see that virtually all the boys on the island abandon Ralph and Piggy and descend further into savagery and chaos. It's only Piggy who is voice of intellect. It's only Ralph who's voice of good by William Golding. And what happens that all the other boys who were initially the supporters of Ralph's vision, now slowly and gradually, or being pressurized, change their votes and voluntarily or under pressure join Jack's tribe. So the left is now Piggy and Ralph as Ralphs. In the final stage of the falling action, that again marks the end of the story as well, we see that when the other boys kill Piggy, and this is the second murder in the story, and destroy the conch shell, the destruction of power that is set right in the beginning of the story, and that is by Piggy, Ralph flees from Jack's tribe and encounters the naval officer on the beach. And naval officer becomes he becomes the survivor. He becomes the survivor for this poor soul who's running from his own friends who were once known as civilized, learned, educated boys of British society. So after discussing the story's plot, now precisely the structure of the story, now we are stepping into the discussion related the themes, motives and symbols present in the story. So there are, as I discussed earlier, precisely there are 3 major themes in the story: the theme of civilization versus savagery, the loss of innocence, and innate human instinct that can be good as well as bad. And the motives and symbols which are used to strengthen these thematic structures are biblical parallels, natural beauty, the bullying of the weak by the strong, the outward trappings of savagery, that is face paintings, use of spears, totems and chants. The symbols which will definitely bring the appropriate colors in the structures created by these thematic goals are the conch shell, a symbol of power, Piggy's glasses, again a symbol of power, and a symbol of vision, a symbol of survivor, and the signal fire. It's a symbol of hope and effort for survival and life and desire for civilization. The beast, symbol of fear. We all have this fear inside, fear of nothing. The Lord of the Flies, the symbol of the evil outside in the world. Ralph, Piggy, Jack, Simon and Roger being characters, even they all are symbols, because it's a political allegory, and not even the objects but also people are presentations and demonstrations of they depict the real society. So, contextual background of the story. After this, we need to now discuss what is the contextual background of the story. So, to go through the story line once again to see if we could not understand anything at any point. Well, starting with writer William Golding, who was born on September 1911 in Cornwall, England. Cornwall is quite a favorite place to be born by these writers, famous writers of 20th century. Although he tried to write a novel as early as age 12, his parents urged him to study the natural sciences. Golding followed his parents' wishes until his second year at Oxford, when he changed his focus to English literature. After graduating from Oxford, he worked briefly as a theatre actor and director. He wrote poetry and then became a school teacher. In 1940, a year after England entered World War II, Golding joined the Royal Navy, where he served in command of a rocket launcher and participated in the invasion of Normandy. Golding's experience in World War II had a profound effect on his view of humanity and the evils of which it was capable. After the war, Golding resumed teaching and started to write novels. His first and greatest success came with Lord of the Flies, which ultimately became a bestseller in both Britain and the United States after more than 20 publishers rejected it. The novel's sales enabled Golding to retire from teaching and devote himself fully to writing. Golding wrote several more novels, notably Pincher Martin in 1956 and a play, The Brass Butterfly, in 1958. Although he never matched the popular and critical success he enjoyed with Lord of the Flies, the political allegory, he remained a respected and distinguished author for the rest of his life and was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1983. Golding died in 1993, one of the most acclaimed writers of the second half of the 20th century. Now, moving on to the product that he produced, the masterpiece by Golding, Lord of the Flies, tells the story of a group of English schoolboys marooned on a tropical island after their plane is shot down during a war. Though the novel is fictional, its exploration of the idea of human evil is at least partly based on Golding's experience with the real-life violence and brutality of World War II. So, the effects of World War I and World War II can clearly be seen in the brutality structured in the story. Free from the rules and structures of civilization and society, the boys on the island in Lord of the Flies descend into savagery. As the boys splinter into factions, some behave peacefully and work together to maintain order and achieve common goals, while others rebel and seek only anarchy and violence. Well, in his portrayal of the small world of the island, Golding points a broader portrait of the fundamental human struggle between the civilizing instinct, the impulse to obey rules, behave morally, and act lawfully, and the savage instinct, the impulse to seek brute power over others, act selfishly, scorn moral rules, and indulge in violence. Probably it's an open display of absolute power corrupts absolutely. Golding employs a relatively straightforward writing style in Lord of the Flies, one that avoids highly poetic language like Virginia Woolf, lengthy descriptions and philosophical interludes like James Joyce. It's a clear, straightforward writing style that he adopts. Much of the novel is allegorical, meaning that the characters and objects in the novel are infused with symbolic significance that conveys the novel's central theme and ideas. In portraying the various ways in which the boys on the island adapt to their new surroundings and react to their new freedom, Golding explores the broad spectrum of ways in which humans respond to stress, change, and tension. Readers and critics have interpreted Lord of the Flies in widely varying ways over the years since its publication. During the 1950s and 1960s, many readings of the novel claimed that Lord of the Flies dramatizes the history of civilization. Some believe that the novel explores fundamental religious issues such as original sin and the nature of good and evil. Others approached Lord of the Flies through the theories of the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who thought that the human mind was the site of a constant battle among different impulses: the id, instinctual needs and desires, the ego, the conscious and rational mind, and superego, the sense of conscience and morality. Still others maintained that Golding wrote the novel as a criticism of the political and social institutions of the West. Ultimately, there is some validity to each of these different readings and interpretations of Lord of the Flies. Although Golding's story is confined to the microcosm of a group of boys, it resounds with implications for beyond the bounds of the small island and explores problems and questions universal to the human experience. In the midst of a raging war, a plane evacuating a group of schoolboys from Britain is shot down over a deserted tropical island. Two of the boys, Ralph and Piggy, discover a conch shell on the beach, and Piggy realizes it could be used as a horn to summon the other boys. Well, quite a sensible and wise idea by a wise boy. Once assembled, the boys set about electing a leader and devising a way to be rescued. Some rules. They chose Ralph as their leader, and Ralph appoints another boy, Jack, who wants to be appointed to be in charge of the boys who will hunt food for the entire group. Ralph, Jack, and another boy, Simon, set off on an expedition to explore the island. When they return, Ralph declares that they must light a signal fire to attract the attention of passing ships for their survival. The boys succeed in igniting some dead wood by focusing sunlight through the lenses of Piggy's spectacles. However, the boys pay more attention to playing than to monitoring the fire, and the flames quickly engulf the forest. A large swath of dead wood burns out of control, and one of the youngest boys in the group disappears, presumably having burned to death. Well, at first the boys enjoy their life without grown-ups and spend much of their time splashing in the water and playing games. Ralph, however, complains that they should be maintaining the signal fire and building huts for shelter. The hunters fail in their attempt to catch a wild pig, but their leader, Jack, becomes increasingly preoccupied with the act of hunting. When a ship passes by on the horizon one day, Ralph and Piggy notice to their horror that the signal fire, which had been the hunter's responsibility to maintain, has burned out. Furious Ralph accosts Jack, but the hunter has just returned with his first kill, first trophy, and all the hunters seem gripped with a strange frenzy, reenacting the chase in a kind of wild dance. Piggy criticizes Jack, who hits Piggy across the face. Ralph blows the conch shell and reprimands the boys in a speech intended to restore order. At the meeting, it quickly becomes clear that some of the boys have started to become afraid. The older boys try to convince the others at the meeting to think rationally, asking where such a monster could possibly hide during the daytime. Well, one of the little loons suggests that it hides in the sea, a proposition that terrifies the entire group. Not long after the meeting, some military planes engage in a battle high above the island. The boys asleep below do not notice the flashing lights and explosions in the clouds. A parachutist drifts to earth on the signal fire mountain dead. Sam and Eric, the twins responsible for watching the fire at night, are asleep and do not see the parachutist land. When the twins wake up, they see the enormous silhouette of his parachute and hear the strange flapping noises it makes. Thinking the island beast is at hand, they rush back to the camp in terror and report that the beast has attacked them. The boys organize a hunting expedition to search for the monster. Jack and Ralph, who are increasingly at odds, travel up the mountain. They see the silhouette of the parachute from a distance and think that it looks like a huge deformed ape. The group holds a meeting at which Jack and Ralph tell the others of the sighting. Jack says that Ralph is a coward and that he should be removed from office, but the other boys refuse to vote Ralph out of power. Jack angrily runs away down the beach, calling all the hunters to join him. Ralph rallies the remaining boys to build a new signal fire, this time on the beach rather than on the mountain. They obey, but before they have finished the task, most of them have slipped away to join Jack. Well, Jack declares himself the leader of the new tribe of hunters and organizes a hunt and a violent ritual slaughter of his sow to solemnize the occasion. Well, the hunters then decapitate the sow and place its head on a sharpened stake in the jungle as an offering to the beast. Later, encountering the bloody fly-covered head, Simon has a terrible vision, during which it seems to him that the head is speaking. The voice which he imagines as belonging to the Lord of the Flies says that Simon will never escape him, for he exists within all men. Simon faints. When he wakes up, he goes to the mountain where he sees the dead parachutist. Understanding then that the beast does not exist externally but rather within each individual boy, Simon travels to the beach to tell the others what he has seen. But the others are in the midst of a chaotic rivalry. Even Ralph and Piggy have joined Jack's feast, and when they see Simon's shadowy figure emerge from the jungle, they fall upon him and kill him with their bare hands and teeth. The following morning, Ralph and Piggy discuss what they have done. Jack's hunters attack them and their few followers and steal away Piggy's glasses in the process. Ralph's group travels to Jack's stronghold in an attempt to make Jack see reason, but Jack orders Sam and Eric tied up and fights with Ralph. In the ensuing battle, one boy, Roger, rolls a boulder down the mountain, killing Piggy, murdering Piggy, and shattering the conch shell. Ralph barely manages to escape a torrent of spears. Ralph hides for the rest of the night, and the following day, while the others hunt him like an animal, Jack has the other boys ignite the forest in order to smoke Ralph out of his hiding place. Ralph stays in the forest, where he discovers and destroys the sow's head, but eventually he is forced out onto the beach, where he knows the other boys will soon arrive to kill him. Ralph collapses in exhaustion, but when he looks up, he sees a British naval officer standing over him. The officer's ship noticed the fire raging in the jungle. The other boys reach the beach and stop in their tracks at the sight of the officer. Amazed at the spectacle of this group of bloodthirsty, savage children, the officer asks Ralph to explain. Ralph is overwhelmed by the knowledge that he is safe, but in thinking about what has happened to the island, he begins to weep. And that's the moment that the writer calls loss of innocence, the acknowledgement of all what has been lost so far. The other boys begin to sob as well, and the officer turns his back so that the boys may regain their composure. And now, looking at the themes quite briefly to see if you remember them. Well, if we divide these three major themes into some subcategories, the subcategories would come up as the theme of primitivity, civilization, innocence, rules and order, fear and power. And theme of identity, religion, wisdom and knowledge, youth, savagery and innocence. Well, some questions that I would suggest for you to prepare for your exams, and you should be prepared for them in any case, are of all the characters, it is Piggy who most often has useful ideas, wide ideas, and sees the correct way for the boys to organize themselves. Yet the other boys rarely listen to him and frequently abuse him and make fun of him. Why do you think this is the case? Why do they do that? In what ways does Golding use Piggy to advance the novel's themes? So here you have to not only discuss Piggy's character in detail, but boys' behavior to Piggy's character, and what William Golding would be using Piggy's character to represent the symbolic status. What, if anything, might the dead parachutist symbolize? Does he symbolize something other than what the beast and Lord of the Flies symbolize? So here you have to discuss the symbols, basically the symbol of parachute and the beast and Lord of Flies as symbols. Do you think that parachute is another symbol of fear? Well, you have to discuss the symbolic analysis of these three objects. The third question is, the sow's head and the conch shell each wield a certain kind of power over the boys. In what ways do these objects' powers differ? In what ways Lord of the Flies is a novel about power, about the power of symbols, about the power of a person to use symbols to control a group? Well, this question brings in the theme of power, theme of power in association with the symbols and motifs used by the writer, primarily the symbol of sow's head and conch shell. Well, the fourth and important question is, what role do the little uns play in the novel? The characters, all the minor characters. In one respect, they serve as gauges of the older boy's moral positions, for we see whether an older boy is kind or cruel based on how he treats the little uns. But are the little uns important in and of themselves? What might they represent? So, character analysis of the minor characters. So, one important question that I would like to discuss in a bit of a detail, some suggestions for that discussion is, what is the scar in Lord of the Flies? On a literal level, the scar is the mark left by conveyance that brought the boys to the island. It crash landed in a skid, knocking down trees and brush, leaving a mark or scar on the land. On a figurative level, the scar represents the evil that mankind has wrought on the world in Golding's view. It's like heaven being scarred by humankind. Golding wanted to say to the readers that the evil within mankind has left an ugly, permanent mark on the world. What is allegory of Lord of the Flies, and what is the importance it has? The island itself is an allegory for society. The author shows that, like children stranded on a deserted island, society can break down due to bad leadership, mob mentality, and a lack of true civilization. James Dunn of the New York Times said that The Lord of Flies is an allegory on human society today. The novel's primary implication being that what we have come to call civilization is at best not more than skin deep. Quite a critical comment though. However, another perspective is that the main allegory for Lord of the Flies is that without civilization, savagery takes over. The Lord of the Flies and the beasts are not really physical characters. It is the evil that is in every human being. Without civilization, the boys unleashed this evil. Piggy stood for intellect, which every civilization needs. When he died, it showed that savagery had completely taken over. Also, Simon stood for morality, but not because civilization told him to be moral, but because he knew that morality was natural. But this book shows that the allegory that savagery is stronger and more natural than civilization, that it took over. The death of Simon indicates how morality and goodness cannot survive without savagery. So what does the piggy's head represent in Lord of the Flies? The piggy's head symbolizes both the savagery that the boys now exhibit outwardly and the Lord of the Flies, because the rotting head is swarming with flies as it sits perched on a stick. It symbolizes loss of hope, fear, and it shows that evil is the beast and evil is in everyone. It symbolizes evil that is in every human, because no matter how rotten and old the pig had got, the remains still was left, and it will exist. While it was breaking down and getting worse, it had a distinguished look and horrible smell. This symbolizes evil, something that isn't welcomed. Also, when the pig head started breaking down, the author described the skull as a laughing face. Evil never leaves, and it also teases because it's so hard to get rid of. Now, what is the difference between metaphor and allegory in William Golding's Lord of Flies? We know that a metaphor is typically a phrase that is used as a comparison to seemingly unrelated objects or actions. A metaphor is a rhetorical trope that represents the first subject as being similar or equal to a second object or a subject in any way. However, an allegory is also a representation of comparisons, but on a much deeper note. An allegory typically consists of a longer passage of comparisons than just a phrase or a word. It also includes more details than a metaphor. An allegory is usually symbolically substituted for something else. A meaningful historical or geopolitical event or a wider abstract concept is usually the goal of an allegory. Metaphors are mainly used in language, whereas allegories can be used in language, painting, sculpturing, etc., in different forms of arts. Some examples of non-metaphor for your convenience: All the World's a Stage by William Shakespeare, Killing Him with Kindness, Frozen with Fear, My Sermon Was a Bottomless Pit. Examples of known allegories: in the novel Lord of the Flies, it provides a compelling allegory of human nature, illustrating the three sides of the psyche through its sharply defined main characters. Second example can be a symbolic representation. The blindfolded figure with scales is an allegory of justice. Metaphor and allegory, as the answer above indicates, are similar. Both of them make comparisons, but the primary difference between them is the depth of the comparison. William Golding, Lord of the Flies, is a highly symbolic novel, and he uses both metaphor and allegories to make his point clear to his readers. One of the most recognizable metaphors Golding uses in the novel is the beast, while the term beast is used to name many actual things in the story, such as creeping wine pigs, a parachutist. Simon recognizes the truth that they are the beast and recognized as evil. Golding is comparing what the boys have become out-of-control savages who have no restraints or authority which they must obey. To beast, in his conversation with the pig's head, known as Lord of the Flies, Simon discovers this truth. Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill, said the head. That is a metaphor, the beast is them. Golding's use of metaphor on a larger scale become an allegory. These proper English schoolboys who do know how to live in a civilized manner and obey rules are deposited on an island on which there are no adults. The only rules they have are those they make for themselves, but those are soon ignored or broken. They live without any restraints, and they eventually became what Golding calls savages. They destroy and they kill, things they would have do in their real worlds. What these boys, and remember they really are just children, do and become over the course of the novel is a picture of unchecked human nature. Their transformation from boys to savages is the allegory Golding uses to make his point clear. And almost the end of the discussion, a very important question: what do you consider to be the most significant quotation from the Lord of the Flies? Well, this one from chapter 2 is pretty important, I guess, and it's definitely one of the most famous as well. We have got to have rules and obey them. After all, we are not savages. We are English, and the English are best at everything. Now, why do I call this quotation most important one? Probably the main theme of the novel is the very fine line between civilization and savagery. The pinnacle of civility is held to be English life, which is echoed in the code. Golding is saying that even the most civilized nation in the world is one step away from brutality. From chapter 5, maybe there is a beast, maybe it's only us, is another quotation that is of importance. This is a good one because one of the main ideas is the beast that's inside of humanity. The boys are scared of the beast, but the beast is inside them. It shows Simon's heightened perception and his ability to express his idea that the beast isn't merely a living thing to be afraid of. It is something that exists and lives in all of us, and when there are no adults and no laws to condition our instincts and desires, we may also become savage. Well, this raises a question, an important question. In chapter 5 of William Golding's Lord of the Flies, what does Simon mean when he says, maybe there is a beast? In chapter 5 of William Golding's Lord of the Flies, the boys hold a meeting because, quite frankly, things are beginning to fall apart. They meet and they talk, but they do not get anything accomplished. The boys are having even more nightmares now, and their talk of beast is rampant and rather outrageous. During the meeting, Simon feels compelled to speak, but it is something he does not want to do. Simon felt a perilous necessity to speak, but to speak in assembly was a terrible thing to him. I quote here. And this was all for today's discussion, and we had a detailed discussion on almost all the writings, and I hope the last bit of this this session where we had revision talks would definitely bridge the gaps if there would have been any. So today I finished your course where we studied all the 4 narratives by 4 famous novel writers narrativist of 20th century. We studied Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, William Golding, and E.M. Forster. So today we finish your course, and I hope by now you'll be prepared for examination. I wish you best of luck for your examinations, and I hope definitely this knowledge will not only be to appear for some kind of test, but for you to be more human and more civilized being by knowing about life from and taking references from literature. Literature is to reform our personalities, not only to upgrade our certificates. I wish you best of luck for everything in life. See you somewhere in some other course. Allah Hafiz.